My name is Ross Victor.
How did you come to identify as bi or queer?
I first knew that I was bi when I was at least 12 or 13. I didn't have the language for it. It was just a feeling. And how I describe it to people is one day I went to bed and I woke up and I was like attracted to boys too. That's like the oddest description, but that's how I remember it. But I grew up in a very religious home, church multiple times per day, and I didn't hear the word bisexual or bi or know that was a thing until about 16 or 17 years old.
What has it been like for you to be out as a bi artist?
Exhilarating, freeing, scary. A lot of times I double take interactions that I have with decision makers, like, oh, am I being left on seen or read because I'm so loud and out and proud? So sometimes that kind of plays with my mind. But I feel that it was the right decision because I wanted something new for myself, and being out has provided me so much more content, lyrics, possibility just in general as an artist.
How do you see yourself as an artist, and how does being bi fold into that?
As an artist, I feel that my job is to make people feel something, be it joy, sadness, laughter. And I think the bi part is built in because when I think of bisexuality, for me, it means imagination, freedom, possibility. And also I feel empowered to take people there. It's kind of like, human emotion, it's dynamic, it's fluid, it's forever changing. And so that comes with me when I'm writing or performing or singing or whatever I'm doing.
Is there anything about yourself that you would like people to know that maybe isn't part of your public persona or that might surprise people?
I grew up in a missionary family. So from a very young age, my parents were traveling the world, telling people about Jesus Christ and this type of thing. And aside from the religious part, a lot of the places that I went, I saw a lot of suffering. I saw a lot of poverty. And so built into my story is a sense of public service and always asking, why is this happening? Is there more to the story? How do I be compassionate? How do I try to understand someone else's story who doesn't necessarily connect with mine? People would be surprised, maybe, I think, to learn that.
So you worked as an English teacher before moving into becoming an artist full-time. Do you feel like there are elements of that calling that are echoed in your work as an artist? Do you feel like you are still teaching through your art?
Yeah, I worked as an English teacher for a very long time. So that was my first job after college. So I was in the career center. The economy had tanked and I was looking for a job. And one of the career counselors was like, have you ever thought about working abroad? I was like, no. So within months, I was on a plane in Seoul, South Korea. And there's certain moments in our life where we go on a plane and we do something and we think, oh, this is not going to matter, or I'm just doing this for that time being. But when I look back as an artist and as an open bi person now, a lot of what was happening in that time period informs directly who I am today. Teaching gave me the actual technical components of grammar structure and clauses and everything. So it gave me something to help where I am on this journey now. And so it's interesting when things come full circle like that.
You were recently interviewed for a profile in LA Weekly. Mm-hmm. Growing up all over LA County, was that like a touchstone periodical for you? And if so, how did it feel to get to open those pages and see yourself there?
Oh my goodness, that was huge for me. When I interviewed for LA Weekly in 2021 during the pandemic, height of the pandemic, that was, again, one of those moments that you don't realize how it impacts you until later. Because you think you're just sitting down and having some discourse with someone, but you're like, hey, this is your city. This is where you're from. I'm from Inglewood. I've lived in Pasadena. I live in Westwood now. I was born and raised here. And so to be featured with my full kind of who I am today was huge for me. Yeah, on a local level.
So your love for the written word started in your youth in reading and collecting library cards alongside your father. Tell me about that.
We drove across the country, and part of that was stopping at local libraries. It was so nerdy, right? Stopping at local libraries and picking up the cards and seeing like who had the best design. And also we would go to Los Angeles Library downtown often. We used to have, I mean, it's the nerdiest thing in the world.
Like an album of them?
Just like, yeah, stacks.
Yeah.
And then we would ask people like, hey, could you give us a library card? And they'd be like, you don't want to, no, we don't want to like an actual working one. We just want your card to prove that we are here, like a souvenir.
Would they usually say yes?
Yeah. Yeah, and Arizona had the best, like at the time, they were on point, the design. And he was someone who sowed those seeds of words and love for language into me. He was also an author, writer, speaker. And I appreciate that from him. He's no longer here. He passed 6 years ago, but he's still with me in those ways. Because when I think about those library cards, traveling across the country, traveling the world, I feel like a lot of those are gifts from my father.
Tell me about how you got into writing novels. Were books always banging around in your brain, or were you inspired to write them after certain life events?
Writing books and novels and all of that was never part of my story. And so it's been 6 years that I've been this person now, and sometimes when I reflect, I'm like, how did I become this person? And so actually grief and loss turned me into this person. So 2017, I lost my dad after a long battle with cancer. And we were best friends. And I said, you know, I have to fill this loss with something else. So I was his son. I'm still his son, but there's a gap there. And so that kind of ushered in the author identity. And I wrote my first book, Views from the Cockpit, in 2019. That was a memoir that was very well received, and I emotionally felt free. And I was like, oh my gosh, I like this feeling. I have to keep going. And so after all of that, I wrote another one. Then I wrote a short story. And then Grandpa's Cabin came. And so really, I turned that sense of loss into some sense of action and filling a gap inside that I felt that I had. And so that's how I got here today.
Transmuting despair into action is a very healing and cathartic thing to do.
Yes. Yes, and I think sometimes we discount it, and the power of writing is something I'm glued to now. Even if it's writing for yourself, it doesn't always have to be shared, but it definitely helped me.
There's a persistent theme in your works of both generational trauma, mental health, and often supernatural or horror elements. I'm gonna guess that's not by accident.
No. I think using horror as a lens can really bring a lot of interesting things to light. For example, secrets, dark secrets, things that are left in the closet, right? So actually I sprinkle bisexuality and kind of becoming and all of these types of things into my stories as well. And so these are topics I feel comfortable with, but I also feel that a lot of people sometimes have some friction with family and discovery and identity and fear. And so my job, I feel, is to package that in a way that is digestible, but also interesting, entertaining, educational. Yeah, that's my comfort zone, those themes.
Do you feel like it's important to bring the themes of bisexuality and queerness into your written works as well, and if so, why?
Part of my writing process with any story or any character is what is the character trying to show me? What is the story trying to tell me? And me being the channel for that. And so sometimes I have this idea, oh, I want to make everyone bi. So like everyone's gonna, like, it's just open, right? But then what sexuality, what life experience, what race, what serves the story the best? And so I try to lead with that while fighting the temptation and the desire just to make everyone queer.
It's hard for me as a writer to resist that because of most of the time we have to assume everybody's straight. So no, you get a story where everybody's queer and you get to see what it's like from my point of view.
There we go. Love that.
You also write for Medium. Mm-hmm. Do you enjoy the immediacy of the publication form and interacting with your followers without a middleman or delays that can often happen with the length of time it takes to write and publish novels?
Writing for Medium is a completely different experience, right? Because it is immediate, you put it up, it's from the heart, it can be your true feelings without any kind of like need to sell. And that gives me an opportunity to interact with people directly. And you know, when I started doing that pandemic or before, a lot of people were reaching out. A lot of men were reaching out like, hey, I want to come out, I don't know how, or thank you for writing that, I felt seen in that. And that took a moment to get used to because, right, so I'm writing because of stuff that's happening in my life to make myself feel free. But it's a whole different ballgame when someone else is touched or affected by something that you've written and they reach out to you and say, hey, thanks for writing that. And then one lady posted one of my articles and was like, oh, Ross Victory is one of my favorite Medium authors. I was like, damn, is this what I'm out here doing? So I love the immediacy. I love being in touch with people in real time. And I love feedback and discourse.
You wrote one of your first dives back into music, Savor the View, to accompany your audiobook for Views from the Cockpit. Did you plan to do that from the conception of the audiobook? And did you think at the time it was a one-off thing or that it would lead to your renewed singer-songwriter career?
I had no idea that I would go back into music. That was pure inspiration. That was pure me actually healing and grieving the loss of my dad. That whole project, Views from the Cockpit, was me exploring. And so during the audiobook process, I was in the studio and the engineer was like, can you sing? Something you just said kind of gave me a vibe that maybe you used to sing. And I was like, yeah, you know, I used to do music production and sing in school 10 years ago. He was like, let me make a song for you. It's just on the guitar, very simple song, and do something with it. And let's just see what happens. I was like, oh, I don't know how to do it. And then all of a sudden this song, Savor the View, came up. And it was literally about my dad. Savor the view, cherish the moments. And that's how I was feeling emotionally. And I was like, wow, maybe there's something here with books and music, and it feels good, and I should lean into it.
With Bisexual Days, you outlined the common experience of bi-panic, as well as a steamy and very bi-menage a trois. What was the thought process behind this? Had you not heard enough of this type of experience or feelings in music out there and wanted to express it?
I'm so excited about your question about Bisexual Days. That makes me so happy. I always think about what was I going through when I create something? What was happening in the world around me? So in real life, I was in a bi men's group. We're talking about relationships, dating, all the common issues. And I was like, you know, this summer I want to do something fun. And by panic, sometimes, you know, when you walk into a room and everyone's hot, like that can be overwhelming, but also that can be exciting and exhilarating. So what does joy look like in that moment? How does that sound? What does it feel like? And then what do we as men, like what would we actually kind of like say and give permission to say? So I found a beat. I'm always scouring the internet for music. And I was like, you know what? I want to go and I want to record this. And I had a conversation with my engineer who's totally pro everyone and everything. I was like, hey, I'm going to do something different. I need you just to bear with me as we get through this song. And he was like, oh, that's a bop. And then I shared it with the guys. And it was almost like, hey, guys, I made this for us. And so we all got to enjoy that moment. And some of them were like, hey, Ross, I really enjoyed how you just went for it. Because, you know, there were some explicit lyrics and some imagination. But, like, celebrate that, too, you know? Not cleanse or, you know, wash it down. And so it was fun.
So I understand you met one of your musical heroes, Neo, on a dare?
Yeah! This was pandemic. And we were in the studio. And Neo had posted something about his music. And we were talking about, hey, you should just message him and, like, see what he says, you know, about like, hey, getting on a song or collaborating or whatever. So I messaged him and he responded, and that just kind of flipped me out when he responded. And we ended up getting on camera on Instagram Live. He ended up sending me his vocals to put on one of my songs called My Fault. And I was just like, wow, so step out in faith, step out in fear, send the email, do it.
So what you're saying is sometimes sliding into DMs works out.
Sliding into DMs always works out. I feel like they're always watching. They're always checking. Yeah. Slide.
You mentioned My Fault, and that song carries a lot of potent imagery and asks a lot of heavy questions. Do you feel a responsibility as a songwriter to both reflect your experiences as well as challenge your listeners to affect change?
Yeah, as a songwriter, definitely I feel responsible to challenge listeners to effect change. At the time My Fault was written, George Floyd had just been murdered on camera. So a lot of that song has that energy, because I think sometimes we feel like every transgression in the world, it's something I did. This cause, this loss, everything's my fault. And so for me, watching George Floyd, and then as a man being able to express that and maybe not feeling empowered to express it, the sexuality part, feeling that you are carrying the weight of the world for this whole community and like everyone's looking down on you, it's that sense of my fault. And so yeah, I think it's important to challenge listeners to think about where they sit with certain topics and also empower them and educate them as well.
Where would you like to go in the next phase of your musical career?
Musically, I've always envisioned myself as supporting other artists. I think at the end of the day, creative writing and songwriting are my go-to, right? So I've always envisioned myself writing songs for artists, opening doors for showcase, helping artists with empowerment, learning how to promote themselves, and really just feel on fire about their own art before they expect other people to do so. So I think that that's kind of like a leadership mentor type of role. But of course, I would love to have a music video that is very well known, or a song or by anthem, that everyone kind of like, oh, this is my shit, go to that. Of course I want that. But I also want to create opportunities for other queer artists to feel lifted up, seen, and just kind of like, you know what, if he can do it, I definitely can.
You've noted in the past that advocacy work and activism is important to your work as well as your art. I'd love to hear more about the why of that and what organizations you've been working with.
Activism and advocacy was never part of the story, just like becoming an author was never a part of the story. But it's important now because I realized all the experiences that I went through, from that 12-year-old person who didn't know what he was feeling, had something, but didn't know what it was, all the life to finding the word, to having a therapist tell me like, hey, it sounds like you're bisexual. Have you thought about that? All of the experimenting with disclosure and coming out and how to date and being ghosted and what does this mean? All of that life, I feel like I could have saved a lot of time. I think it's almost part of my job to reach back to someone else who is going through that. Specifically if their parents or their environment isn't supportive. One big development for me was becoming involved with the local organization called LA Bi Task Force, which is an educational advocacy group. When that opportunity popped up, I had to take it. I always used to dream like, wow, what if I had existed to myself when I was a little kid? Like, oh, there's this man out there, he likes who he likes, and he's talented, and he's creative, and he's educated, and all these things. So I feel like I want to be that for someone else. Or I have to be that for someone else. I got involved with organizations like Covenant House in Hollywood, which is a youth shelter for 18 to 24-year-olds. A high LGBTQ population there, of course, kids being kicked out. I also got involved with the Shower of Hope, which gives showers to people who maybe got an interview or just want to clean up. So I think, just like anything else, it's a product of who I am.
Is there anything I didn't cover in my questions you would like to talk about?
Yeah. So something I think it's important to know is right now with the music, with the writing, with the higher ed, with the advocacy, with the education, for the last 6 or 7 months, I've been thinking about what can I do to help further lift up bi men. We need a moment. So I've been working on this creative writing course that uses different type of creative writing topics, almost to probe or provide a conduit to express our identities. That's something that's really important to me because I feel that writing has been a key part of my story, key source of empowerment, and I feel I have to share the power of writing with other people. And so that is something I'm really looking forward to, which I hope will drop this year.
Before we move into our final question, is there anything upcoming that you would like to promote in the upcoming months?
So I'm always working on music and writing. I think I'm going to make it a thing to drop a banger for the summer. So I have a song called I'm a Look, which is about this guy. He's at the beach and he's just talking about all the hot people passing by. So that's going to drop in the summertime. That's a hip-hop R&B song. And I'm also working on a short story. It's a political thriller. We have an election coming up, so that's timely. I'm always doing something, so definitely keep in touch with me. You can get on my website, rossvictory.com. I'm also on Instagram, rossvictorious.
Do you have any advice for those who are newly identifying as bi or queer? And any advice you wish you could have given your younger self before you came out?
First, take your time. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. There's a lot of voices online. There's a lot of messages we get in society from our friends and our family. You are valid. Take your time. You don't have to prove anything. And also consider, when we think about coming out, I think that there's a societal component that makes us want to take a stand. But also ask, is that your version of coming out? Maybe that's not your version. Maybe your version is a selective coming out. Hey, a trusted aunt, a trusted cousin. There are different ways to broach the conversation, and not everyone's coming out or their letting in journey looks the same. So keep that in mind. Get a few good people, put them in your back pocket, and never let them go.